My name is Moonlit. As Anjali mentioned, I lead gaming at Google. Gaming is a very interesting market. It's $200 billion market. Earlier when Mindy mentioned that Japan used to invest $500 billion, maybe in gaming. It is the #1 platform of fun for Gen Z and Gen Alpha. It's the 4th most time spent activity per day after eating, sleeping, and going to school or working. So now we'll talk about how gaming is the very foundation of the cultural exchange bridge between Japan and US. And none better than my panelists can talk about that. So I'll throw it to you guys. Tell us your name, what do you do, your background, and what makes you uniquely qualified to talk about gaming across the Pacific.
Hello, my name is Yukiko Hanzawa. I work for Bandai Namco Entertainment America. We are a game publisher based in Irvine, California. Before Bandai Namco Entertainment, I'm from Japan. I'm originally from Japan. I worked in all gaming companies in Japan while I was based there. So I worked for American gaming companies like Blizzard, Take-Two Interactive, and right now I work for a Japanese gaming company in the US. So I feel like I have both experience, working in the American companies in Japan, and now I'm working for a Japanese company in the US. I'm also from tiny village in Japan. Right now I'm talking to beautiful people like yourselves in front of, in the middle of Hollywood, LA. I'm only mentioning this because I feel like anime or Japanese content in general had a similar path, sort of. Like it started out with a very localized niche content, but it has sort of become global phenomena. I'm not saying I'm a global phenomenon, but I'm just saying it kind of started out with something small, but it became something global. So I feel like that's my personal passion, and I'm really honored to be that part of the panel. John.
Hi, I'm John Goldman. I've been in the video game industry since the 90s. I started a independent developer, which grew to be the largest independent developer in the world, and then sold that and got involved in venture capital in the video game industry, which I still do. I invest in video game companies. I'm also an owner and partner in an entertainment company called Skybound. We're best known for doing The Walking Dead, and now some of you of a certain age might know something we have right now called Invincible, which is a very popular TV show. And I'd say, particularly at Scott Bolt's, first of all, you can't be in the video game industry if you're not just incredibly influenced by Japan and Japanese culture. It's one of the birthplaces of this form of entertainment. And then Skybound as an entertainment company is shaped very much like a Japanese company like Bandai Namco or Sega. We do comic books, and then those comic books, like Walking Dead, have become TV shows, and then we create an ecosystem of video games and merchandise and live event experiences. And I think that's very much influenced by Japan. We've produced TV shows in Japan. We've taken Japanese IP and produced them overseas. So I'd say it's pretty deeply in all of our DNAs. And I'd say the main owners at this company are all Japanophiles. I even have a little place in Kyoto, and I get there as often as I can.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for having us for this panel and sticking around for the last one. My name is Karim Farghaly, so I'm a Senior Vice President at Bandai Namco Entertainment America as well. I'm on the same team as Yukiko. So I oversee several aspects of our business in the US. The main part of the business is licensing, so I oversee all the activations that we do for our IPs, our brands. So that includes Pac-Man, Tekken, Elden Ring, and some of the older ones that we have as well. I also oversee the Pac-Man brand in general, so a lot of the activation that you see, especially in live experiences, and we have a sponsorship with the Los Angeles FC Football Club here. We have an arcade called Level Up Arcade at BMO Stadium. We also have a sponsorship with the LA Angels at Angel Stadium. We have a much larger Arcade 1-Up, no, not Arcade 1-Up, Level Up Arcade, that's another product that we license out. And so, we really focus on activating our IPs in the West. And so we oversee, obviously, the Americas. We, obviously are reaching out to all our fandom. And I would say the reason why, I'm probably qualified to be here and talk about this is because I've been working for Bandai Namco for 10 years. I wasn't a big anime person. My previous job, I had a studio in Austin, Texas, where I made a lot of Hello Kitty games, which is another very big IP, which I love, together with Pac-Man. Previous to that, I started my career at Interplay Entertainment in London. We worked on a game called Fallout, which has become a favorite TV show now. We've had a few good TV shows in the industry. Last of Us and Fallout, to name a few. And then I actually was fortunate enough to go to Japan and have a project funded, which was called Hello Kitty Cruisers, that was released in 2014 and continued for about 10 years, which was a very successful video game, which was very similar to Mario Kart, but used Hello Kitty and all the other Hello Kitty and Friends character that we created in 3D. So that's me.
Thank you, thank you. In the earlier panel, Johan talked about players being the core assets for sports. If players are the core asset for sports, then for gaming, it's IP. Karim, I'll start with you. Can you talk about how Bandai Namco thinks about bringing IP to the Western market?
That's a very challenging topic, but I'll try to be as brief as possible on it. So, so we have a number of IPs like Pac-Man, like Tekken, like Elden Ring that we produce not just on the video game side, but we also work on them on the toy side. We have a relatively large toy business called Bandai. And we also work on them on the amusement side. We have an amusement division that you see at David Buster's, a lot of the products that we have, both physical and the electronic arcades, like the world's largest Pac-Man and so forth. So we obviously have an approach which is where we try to deliver IPs to our fans using multiple media. And that basically means that if our fans can interact with our IPs in more than one way, we're pretty much certain that we're going to deliver a much richer experience. And we see this on some of the live experiences that we create, where we have video games, we have toys, we have gashapon machines, we have many ways that our fans can interact with our IP. So that's number one. The second piece of it, I think, is how we're set up in territories that are outside Japan. So one thing that you guys should be aware of is on the PC console market, Japan used to be a very big market when the PlayStation was around, the PlayStation 1 was around. And really, Japan in the last 20 years or so probably has really moved a lot of their console. The players have moved from console to mobile, right? And obviously, Google Play is huge in Japan. iOS is very large. So we've seen kind of a movement, which that has resulted in the fact that most Japanese video gaming companies that are doing PC console, which is what we do most of here in the US, are really creating products for export. So most of the products that we create, 80% of our players are actually in the West. They're either in the Americas, mostly the United States, or they're in Western Europe, which is where the console market is the most, developed, right? So we do operate a lot of local offices. We have 9 in Europe, for example, where we localize our message that comes from Japan, and we try to localize our IP as much as possible, understanding how the fans interact with our IPs so that it's not, when it comes out of Japan, it's quite raw. It's come out of, Japanese version. And then as it travels to all our different offices, we try to localize that message. So that's really kind of the approach that we have. It's, I think, an approach that Japanese companies have used in the past, car companies, electronics companies, where we basically, have a number of team members that are we're located in the West, and we basically analyze the market and feed that information back so that we can really serve our fans better and understand better how they like to interact with our IPs.
Thank you. Yukiko, from your perspective, what are some challenges or best practices when you bring such a deeply rooted IP from Japan to a broader Western market?
Sure. I can think of something really specific. So does everybody know what Gundam is here? Gundam as a franchise? Oh, good. A lot of nods. So Gundam is a beloved IP that we actually own as a Bandai Namco. So when we try to bring, iconic franchise like Gundam over to US market, what we try not to do is actually try not to lose its core identity or, the universal theme and appeal that it has, right? So what we try to do is try to make a different entry point. So what we did, and it's a great, one of the great examples of that is in-game collaboration. And when I say in-game collaboration, I'm talking about making Gundam-themed items in other people's game, basically. And we partnered up with a partner like Activision Blizzard. They have this little franchise called Call of Duty or Overwatch. I don't know if you're not a gamer, you probably have heard of these names, right? They're one of the most long-standing and most iconic gaming franchises of all time. So what we did was we took the Gundam as an inspiration and made in-game items in Call of Duty Mobile, and Overwatch. So between Call of Duty franchise and Gundam, actually they share the same theme of war and military. So it was a little bit easier to bring, like creating operator skins or like cosmetic items and even like gameplay experiences based on Gundam. But with Overwatch, I don't know if you know, but Overwatch is a hero shooter, meaning each character that you can play are called heroes, and they have very distinct game style and also visual style. So what we did was took the Gundam inspiration from Gundam mech design. Sorry, mobile suits. We don't call mech. It's a mobile suit. So we took the inspiration from the mobile suits design and applied that to Overwatch hero skin visual design, so that it kind of feels very natural and native in the Overwatch universe. So for one of the example, there's a character called Mercy in Overwatch, and she's this like really beautiful, angelic character who has wings, right? And then in Gundam, we just happens to have mobile suits called Gundam Wing. And Gundam Wing has wings. And Gundam Wing actually as a franchise just happens to be one of the most popular Gundam franchise in the US. So we took the inspiration from the Gundam Wing mobile suits design and applied that to Mercy. So Mercy still looks like Mercy, she has wings because she already has that. But there's a distinctive Gundam Wing influence, that we apply to the Mercy skin design. So users kind of, go nuts because it's still Mercy, but it's still Gundam Wing at the same time. So users are able to experience Gundam universe without, without feeling like it's forced or foreign. So it's one of the great examples of bringing a deeply rooted Japanese IP like Gundam and then apply to some, Western market product. And working with the Activision team was such a joy because there's a fandom within the game development team. So, there's like just love and passion when they propose the design ideas. We can feel this is something that was designed from the team that wants to create something great, wants to bring Gundam to the Western market. So it's one of the great, example of like with the partnership, like, the Western partners, we're able to bring something that is so deeply rooted Japanese IP over to Western or the US market.
I love that. Blending makes a lot of difference. And John, my next question for you is let's look at the other way around. Like, how do you think about Western IP in the world transmedia?
Well, one of the challenges we have here, and it is a global challenge, but there is more good stuff to experience than there is waking hours, and so battling it out in the attention economy is very challenging. So, Western IP does migrate, and having an IP that's gestated over decades, like The Walking Dead or Invincible, can make a big difference in breaking through. And because people now access their content pretty much the same way through a click on the internet, it does mean that stories and IPs can resonate all over the world. But there are things, so if we're speaking specifically about Japan, you can think of things like the Animatrix or things where you take a particular Western IP and you adapt it in a style that makes sense for you know, not only Japanese, but all Asian audiences. But I wanted to sort of tie it together with one of your questions for Karim. So IP is indeed an important asset, but I don't think it's the exact parallel to baseball players in the MLB, because one of the challenges of video games is you're not just telling a story or using IP, you're creating an experience. And so your actual core asset, I believe, is the players. It's very, you know, you can have a great IP, but if people don't show up and have fun, you can't have a successful game. So it's very much in like running a nightclub today, where you have to program it, you know, you have to program for it every night. You have to have new bands, you have to have a good food and beverage program, you have to have all those things. And when probably at least the two of us got started in the video game industry, it was a consumer packaged good. So you just made something, you put it in a box, and you sold it. Now you're running something all the time, and the IP can be an open sesame. It gets people's attention in a world where they're overloaded with options, but it's not enough. It's just this. It's necessary, but not sufficient.
I want to pull on that, the evolution of the gaming industry going from CPG, consumer packaged goods, to now what we call a free-to-play model. This is what creates a $200 billion market. It's how we monetize differently for different people, different preferences. John, maybe like give a little background and history of the free-to-play, how that came about, and why it's important for the gaming industry.
Well, the free-to-play market really exploded in Asia. And there were a couple of fits and starts in the United States and Europe to bring Asian-style games to the US. And there was just a different player pattern in Asia to begin with. First of all, many Asian countries had adoption of play and entertainment on phones more quickly than the United States and Europe. So they were used to it. You're playing in bite-sized sessions instead of something like Call of Duty where you're going to crash through tens of hours. And so when you're playing in these bite-sized sessions, it created an incentive and acceptance to pay for ways to advance in the game. Like, I want to get, you know, better weapons or better sports equipment or other stuff, and I'm willing to trade dollars for status and recognition and advancement in this game because I don't have enough, you know, I don't have enough time. And at first, that was, when that migrated to the US and Europe, that was considered a little bit dishonorable. We're not going to do that sort of thing. And something that we didn't talk about when we talked about this previously is mobile games and the free-to-play model really exploded after an earlier financial crisis in the US. And that's when models like free-to-play or advertising-supported games really work versus the American model of, at the time, $90 or $80 games. So there was this societal backdrop that really promoted it. And then players in Asia, the US, everywhere figured out ways that you're not just buying status and recognition in the game, but they built in gameplay mechanics where you're actually just getting more entertainment value. There's stuff I want, and I feel good about buying it because it enhances my gameplay. It doesn't just push me forward in the game, and you know, there are other like little finer points. So I don't know if that resonates with both of you, that sort of retelling.
Yeah, maybe Yukiko, you can talk about what's that like for the PC world?
No, definitely. I think I can relate to that because I had a very personal, very kind of failure story where we had this game called Gundam Evolution. It was a free-to-play Gundam shooter game. So you pilot mobile suits and you basically shoot, other mobile suits. Basically, it was a free-to-play game, meaning that players spend money by purchasing in-game items. So the monetization, to your point, John, I think we saw exactly that happening. The monetization expectation differs between regions. So in the West, people are very, very sensitive to this, idea of pay to win, right? It's like you pay to get stronger faster is basically what the pay to win is all about. And I think Western users are very, very sensitive to that. So they want to, monetization centered around more like cosmetic items or battle passes, that doesn't have any direct impact on competitive gameplay. Whereas in the East, like John said, because of the mobile, exposure, or, the fact that, people spend more, just tend to spend more money on gaming, they're not as opposed to pay to win as Western players. But in Gundam Evolution, we did not quite craft a monetization strategy that is suitable for each region. So it was more like single monetization strategy across board. So we quickly realized that did not work out because sometimes Eastern players will spend a lot of money to get their favorite character or power-ups or progression boosters. And it was almost justifiable because there was a love for the IP. Gundam IP, players want to spend money. Players want to get their favorite mech behind the paywalls. And it was almost justifiable. So we did not see that doesn't work in the West. So by the time we realized that, it was kind of too late. So the game is no longer available. We had to shut it down. So there are cases where monetization sometimes, breaks or makes the game. And granted, there are other issues with the game, the technical issues, game design issues, but monetization being not crafted to cater to different regions was one of the reasons why the game did not survive.
We all love a failure story. So thank you for sharing that openly. Karim, what about from your perspective? How did free-to-play come to be such a dominant monetization model on mobile?
Yeah, no, for me it would be mobile. So one of the advantages of working for a company as large as Bandai Namco is that you get to work in different areas. So when I started in mobile. This was around 2015, and to follow up on one of John's points is it was the big growth of free-to-play mobile, right? And so I was hired to source Western IPs, find Western studios, and put games together. And obviously we had quite a few failures there because mobile is about failing fast, and that's how games get developed, but that's a different topic. What I noticed, which was very interesting, so at the time in 2015, Bandai Namco had probably 2 or 3 pretty big games in the top 20 across multiple territories, both Google Play, obviously, and iOS. I think there was a One Piece game, there was a Dragon Ball game, and there was a Digimon game. And one of the most interesting things that I learned is we operated 2 masters for each game. There was a master for Japan, and there was a master for the rest of the world. And so there was a producer in Japan that was, basically doing the, his team was working on the Japanese master. And then there was another producer working on, and so what's the difference? Why do we have 2 masters? And so basically what I found out is that in Japan, the mobile game would get updated every weekend. So every weekend there was a new event on Friday night that would come out in the game for Japan. But for the rest of the world version, that was maybe once a month or once every 2 weeks. And what I learned is that obviously in Japan, because the market had moved so much towards mobile, there were so many IPs that were competing for mobile. Dragon Ball, One Piece, those are, some of the IPs. There was a lot of other IPs that were competing there. There were local IPs, some of which I had never heard of. That, the content, the cadence of the content was so much higher that we had to keep these players engaged so that they wouldn't go to another game during the weekend. right? And then I realized how much mobile was powerful in Japan versus it hadn't really developed as much in the US, although there was a very strong growth. I mean, at the time, if you remember, there was no shooters in mobile. Only in Asia, there was shooters in mobile. That was the first, games like Call of Duty came out on mobile and started being played in Asia way before they became available in the West. So definitely, I experienced it in mobile. John mentioned it earlier, but certainly the mobile market was very instrumental in growing free-to-play. And continues to be predominantly mobile, the free-to-play market, because we've seen, I think, a little bit of a retrenchment on console and PC as far as some of the big free-to-play games, that have come out lately. So,
Thank you for that. I want to switch gear a little bit. One of the reasons I love gaming as an industry is that we're always looking forward. We embrace technology, new things, new trends, innovation. So looking at some of the more recent trends in gaming technology, name it like UGC, user-generated content, AI, XR, AI, near and dear to my heart, Google. How do you think these trends will impact the two markets differently, US versus Japan, East versus West? Anybody want to pick one to start?
AI is a hot topic. So this may be a bit in the weeds, but although gaming is very popular, it's a very big industry, it is experiencing a little bit of a plateau in the West. And if you took out the Asian market, it's actually a little bit flat to slightly declining in the US. And part of the explanation is that we had this incredible bump during COVID when everybody was sitting around playing games. But so one of the key things that AI can allow is changing the cost structure and development time so that you can bring good quality content more rapidly or do more rapid development of content updates. So that's the potential benefit of it. I'd say there's much more opposition in the United States creative community around using it. So I'd say in the creative space, we're adopting it a little more slowly. And we have had job losses in the video game industry in the US, so that it is a bit of a hot button issue. So if I were crystal balling, I don't feel that reticence in Japan, Korea, and China, and I think that Asia will be a rapid innovator in exploring how AI can affect gameplay.
Yeah, we definitely see that difference in the partners in the US versus from Asia. Yeah.
I think UGC is something that is very different from US and Japan. UGC here, I'm talking about platforms like Roblox and Fortnite, UFN, or Minecraft. Maybe your kids or somebody have been obsessed with one of these platforms at some point in their lives. So on Roblox, UFN, Fortnite, and Minecraft, users are not only consume content, but they themselves can be a creator, right? So they can consume content, but at the same time build content and share it with others, and even build communities around it, and then even generate meaningful income out of it for some. So in the US, I think because of the these platforms like Roblox, Fortnite, and Minecraft, I think users are very comfortable the notion of creating something using IP and then share it with other people. While in Japan, I think consumer sentiment is a little bit different. I think Japanese consumers tend to place high value on like content quality, craftsmanship, official canon and things like that. So because of that, Japanese IP holders are usually very slow in opening up their worlds to content creation by end users. So we tend to kind of move slower. And we are also IP holder. Bandai Namco, we have IPs like IP meaning, brand or franchise, like Pac-Man, Tekken, Dark Souls, Soul Calibers, those are our beloved IPs. I think challenge for us is balancing, protecting these integrity of these beloved IPs and also empowering fans to participate creatively at the same time. So I think for Japanese IP holders, there needs to be some guardrails or parameters in terms of how we allow users or fans to create content for us to kind of feel comfortable enough to enter into this UGC space. I think US will continue to lead this creator-driven ecosystem. There are some regulations and some news about Roblox being sued by some, there's a lot of changes happening, but in the meantime, I think US remain the top runner, and I think Japan or East Asian, countries will follow the suit.
Yeah, I love John's points. I do agree with the AI piece. I'll add a couple of things. So from a Japanese company perspective, I would say that, and really more of my personal opinion, because I think there's a lot that goes into these discussions about, how we treat IP with AI and all that stuff. But I see Japan and Asia using AI to reduce development costs, reduce QA costs, and really work to reduce development costs, but not use as much Gen AI, meaning creating new assets using AI. I think Japan is because of the amount of IP and the copyright issues that come into creating these new versions of IP, I would say. So I see that happening. In the US, 100% agree that right now, US gamers are very against AI. And I think every time AI is used in a game, there's 15 articles that come out the next day talking about this. And so people have this kind of, feeling about AI. I have a feeling that eventually AI will become, in the West, the way we personalize games. We're seeing games now that are coming in, that are getting pitched to us by various US-based studios that use a lot of dialogue, new ways to interact with the players that are more personal. And obviously, as you know, the AI has the ability to customize itself to each player. So each playable character, even non-playable character in these games, has now created a kind of personal experience for the player. And I see this happening more in the West, where developers now are trying to use AI to create more personal experience, just one game that can be slightly customized for different people as they play it differently, right? And that could be a very interesting way that AI could be used in the West, I think. And we're seeing a lot more of that happening. I did want to mention cloud computing. Google has been obviously a big pioneer in cloud computing. This is something I think that's happening more and more in the West, and we're seeing more and more games being served through streaming, through the cloud, meaning, there's a lot of devices now that are available that are handheld devices. Sony has one, Xbox has one. A lot of people see the future of games being delivered as streaming versus games running on a console or something like that. So there's no more reason for a box or something. There's a device called the PlayStation Portal that came out a few years ago, but now fully works on streaming. You have the ability to play Elden Ring or some of the most immersive games that are available on your PlayStation on a handheld, and it's just being served through the cloud. The only thing you need is really a strong internet connection, which most of us have today. I think that's really happening in the West, and it's really developing very fast. I see that happening more and more where the games are being delivered now through streaming versus living on your PC or on your console.
The question is, who will be the Netflix of games? Maybe Netflix. I'll end this with the last question. What is one trend from Japan that you think US can learn from?
I'm not sure it's something that US can learn from, but I think it's something that US hasn't quite caught up, and it's female-targeted games. And when I say female-targeted games, I'm not talking about like Animal Crossing or like female-friendly cozy games. Like they could loosely categorize under female friendly games, but I'm talking about more specific, like character-driven, narrative-driven, often mobile. And you play as a female protagonist, and you kind of interact with the male characters in the game. And oftentimes, these male characters are like super good looking. So that's the specific type of game I'm talking about. And I think in East Asia, developers are early on, they're able to kind of identify these needs, right? So they have, these female audiences have very specific interests and spending habits. And we, as Bandai Namco, we also have this game called Idolish 7. I don't know if you know. But this is a rhythm/music game, so it's not a romanceable game. And romanceable game, by that I mean you play a protagonist and then you can like fall in love with the character. It's not exactly that. It's a subgenre of a female-targeted games. But so our Idol 7 game is you play as a protagonist and then you manage this male idol groups, right? And then we have this like offline events for this game. We sell characters merchandise, and we even have concert for this game. So we have voice actors come on stage and perform songs from the game, and women go bananas. Like they go crazy. They will line up hours to get specific, characters merchandise, and they cheer on, these voice actors on stage. It is a level of engagement that you don't see any other genre of game. This is very specific to female-targeted games, and this is akin to more like K-pop rather than gaming. And I think West has done really well in terms of like broadening gaming audiences, but I think East did really well in intentionally designing something for specific audience, in which case female demographic. And I think there's still opportunity to do that, but again, it needs to be really specific and intentionally designed for female audiences because we're a little bit different.
I'm all for that. People are often surprised to find out that there is 3.5 billion gamers in this world, which means every other human being almost, right? So half of that must be women. Why don't we have more intentionally designed games for women? There's a business opportunity. Anybody else?
I think there's often this stereotype that the West is very creative with storytelling, and Asian cultures are incremental improvers. And I actually think in the case of video games, the US in particular has adopted actually a CPG strategy for games in most of the US companies, and we've calcified a bit around the brands that we're doing, whereas the quirky level of innovation and creativity in Japan in particular is just stunning. And this may not happen, but it's more of a hopeful statement. I wish we had more of that here. Like Japanese companies like Bandai, like Sega, like Nintendo in particular, really go for the fun first, as opposed to we're building a business around a brand, and then when something takes off, they build a business around it. But I think the level of creativity in Japan is amazing, and that's why it's such a magnet for youth culture all over the world.
That goes back to the player-centric mentality. Right?
That's right.
Yeah. Karim?
Yeah, and just to add to that point, I think what we've seen in the last few years happening, I think when I joined the industry, the US was a net exporter of IP. Star Wars, Star Trek, Call of Duty, at least in the video game world. And because I think Hollywood has been a net exporter of US IP for many years. What's happening today is I think Japan, Korea, and now China are really exporting a lot more IPs than the US is exporting IPs. And I think the players are noticing that and expressing more and more interest in IPs. There's a different type of storytelling, and they want to learn these new stories. And we're seeing Japan has been doing it for 30 years now, but now we have Korea, which is coming out with some really terrific games, terrific IPs as well. They know how to create IPs. China has started creating premium PC console games, which compete with some of the best games that we have in Japan and in the West. So I think we're seeing a little bit of a shift in terms of net exports, is who in the world is really exporting the IPs as far as gaming is concerned. And we've seen a shift in the last few years. We had, I don't know if you guys saw, but in the last week or so, it's been Summer Games Fest here in Los Angeles, where we have Summer Games Fest, which is the big show on Friday that came out on Friday, where the industry announces a lot of games, and then we have some events, live events, where we're showing the games to the press. I think a lot of the feedback has been that some of the best games that we're seeing on this show have been from the East, right, on some of the new IPs. So this is something that I wanted to mention because it is changing the way players are consuming content, not just in terms of the IPs that are interested in, but also how they're, consuming content differently, right? I mean, we mentioned UGC, Roblox, Fortnite. People are consuming content in bite-sized formats now, much more. Not just in gaming, but social media. You're looking Instagram, TikTok, 30 seconds. YouTube is a good example of that as well. So we are noticing that. The players are consuming our content in a different way. I think Hollywood is noticing that as well, that their content is being consumed a different way. My 18-year-old son, I can never take him to a movie. He grew up with YouTube. I mean, why would I go to a movie? Maybe for the popcorn, but it's not something that's ingrained in them, and we're really seeing it now. They are on YouTube playing a video game and talking to their friends at the same time. This kind of multitasking is something that we've seen with some of the Gen Zs recently. So lots of changes there from the players.
All right, perfect timing. Let's go to Q&A. Yes, in the front.
Hello. Okay, so my name is Adisel Inomoto. I work for GPI US, where we bring Japanese high school students to Los Angeles. But my question was more about, because until you guys had mentioned like Star Wars and some of those bigger, franchises, you could say, I had a hard time thinking of maybe like, in Japan it's like oshi, like the goods that you can buy for a particular character. I don't know that many famous, American ones, but I can recognize a lot of Japanese characters that are really popular lately, and so I'm curious to know if you guys have any thoughts as to why that would be. Why is it that the diversification of goods in the East is way more prominent, a lot more interest, I would say, than maybe in the United States, but maybe that's just I'm not in the right fields or the right groups, so any thoughts?
I'm not sure I quite understood that question, but you're saying the diversification of goods, meaning the items that are being offered, there's such a plethora of different items?
Yeah, they could get it from Gacha Gacha, they could get like a little...
okay, I see what you mean.
They could put it on their bags and things like that, but you don't really see that here.
You're talking about the novelty of, some of the novelties. Well, I think that goes back to one of the trends that maybe we talked about. I mean, when we go to Japan, we go to a lot of retail stores and we try to find out what the latest trends are, right? I mean, it could be toys, it's not necessarily digital video games for us, but we look at it in a licensing matter. And how do we license IPs? What type of products can we create in terms of consumer products? And so there's a lot of, we do partner with a lot of different companies, and we try to find companies that are manufacturing consumer goods. And I'm hoping that answers your question. I'm not sure, but I hope. We try to partner with companies that are going to develop the IP and create new products and use their creativity to extend the IP, right? By creating new products that our fans are going to love. We don't know necessarily what our fans are going to love, right? But we rely on partnerships, people that understand their vertical market, especially on consumer products, right? And I think in Japan, there's a lot of different the companies that do this use a lot of creativity and work very closely with our teams. And now it's becoming in the West as well. So there's a lot of opportunities to extend the IP and create new versions of the IP. I think a lot of Japanese IP holders are very open to that, right? I'll give you an example. I mentioned Hello Kitty Cruisers as a game that I worked on 15 years ago. We were the first ones to create 3D versions of a lot of the friends of Hello Kitty. So Kuromi and Batsmaru, and a lot of them in 2014, they were only 2D. So there's no behind to them. So we had to create the behind. We had to create a 3D version, and that was great because even Sanrio had never seen a 3D version of Hiromi or some other character. Of course, Hello Kitty had already been created in 3D, but all the other characters. I think for that game we had 12 characters because it was a Hello Kitty and Friends game. But anyway, that gives you an example of some of the openness that we've seen with Japanese companies.
That definitely helps because I just think I don't really see that often that a lot of I see a lot of Gudetama dolls and Sanrio things being imported here, but I was wondering when I go to Japan, I know if you go to Disneyland, of course you're gonna get some of those bigger franchises, but I don't know too many American characters that are just randomly and very openly available to many in Japan, and I wonder if it's just because they just like you said, they were just focusing on the fun short bit parts and not really thinking about the larger brand identity and how to extend the life of those characters and really value those characters. So that did help.
Are you saying we should have more Star Wars Labubu?
No. That's a great question. We'll talk about Labubus later.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
With the DJs, Directors Guild of America. I have a question about ownership of games versus buying and then finding out that you have only licensed it. Do you guys have any insight on that?
Well, I mean, it's a software product, so it sort of falls under the for all the sort of legal regime that software has fallen under. But for all intents and purposes, you basically own it. I can't think of cases where anybody takes it back from you. I think it's more of the legal regime than any difference in ownership of a game versus a physical item.
Last question. Oh, do you want to chime in?
No, I think he's...
Thank you.
All right, over there.
Good question.
Hi. So I was just wondering, you kind of touched on this when you were talking about monetization and the weekend events and such, but I was wondering on a bigger scale, the IP itself or different storytelling, developing things, how do you appeal to both Western and Japanese audiences, because they have very different sensibilities, and sometimes I feel if something starts off very distinctly Japanese, as it grows, or not grows, globalizes, there's kind of a risk of it losing what set it apart originally. So what's the approach there? How do you manage to expand and appeal to different audiences without totally changing things too much?
I mean, I can talk about it from a Western standpoint. So something like The Walking Dead appeals very strongly in the U.S., Europe, South America. It has been very popular in parts of Japan, but it's not the same sort of story. So we actually don't try to force it, on a cultural context or dilute it. So approaches we've talked about, for example, is, well, for those of you who I just assuming people know it, it's a big zombie, story. We would set a part of the zombie apocalypse in Japan, or we would tell the story as it makes sense in Japan. And an example is that we've done the opposite direction, is we've taken Japanese manga and we've adapted it for Nordic countries and are producing it in Swedish with a Swedish co-financing, and we've done it the other way where we've taken a Western IP, a comic book in the US, and we did it as a TV show for Fuji TV with Japanese actors, Japanese director, fully, you have to adapt things creatively. You just can't treat them as brands to be, monetized.
Yukiko, you mentioned earlier also the idea of not forcing it. Do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think the content itself doesn't have to be changed, and there's obvious elements like localization that needs to be changed. But I think when it comes to globalizing or localizing to each market, I think marketing is really big pick also. I think I talked about monetization, but marketing, sometimes games key art, one key art really changes. One key art really appeals to one market, and the exact same key art does not work for another region. So, small things like that really makes a big difference. And I'm not a marketer, so I can't really talk too much about marketing, but I think the content doesn't need to be changed, but surrounding, parts of it like monetization, marketing, localization, those things are really different depending on the market. So I think to your point, it's kind of like bringing an IP to other markets. The core doesn't necessarily have to change, but how do we bring it to the market is the question. That sometimes changes drastically from one market to another.
Did you want to add, Karim?
Yeah, I think Yukiko has a great point. I'll take the example of Gundam. So that question is a classic problem for us because some of the IPs that have been created a long time ago. Gundam was created in 1979 in Japan, and really didn't come to the West until probably Gundam Wing, that was popular in the 90s, maybe. So there was about 20 years where Gundam was pretty much strictly an Japan and Asia IP, right? So develop a lot of core fans there. The problem that we have today is that we're obviously trying to give the Western market a taste of Gundam. And the way we do it when we create games for the Japan market for Gundam is we include a lot of details, right? A lot of details because we assume that our core fan has a lot of knowledge on the IP. Unfortunately, that does not work in the West because we overwhelm the player with too much knowledge and they don't have a way to really sink into the IP. So we have to curate the story for them. And so it creates kind of like a spin-off of something. So it's a different version of Gundam, right? It's a more of a not watered down, but a more Western-facing version of Gundam. And sometimes we have to be very careful not to alienate our core fans when we create those type of experience. So this is a classic problem that we have, and I think we solve it by creating spin-offs. And you see Gundam has so many different worlds and universes that have been created over the years, right? There's been Gundam for kids. There's a world for women that's more, for women. And so there has been versions of the IPs that have been created, little subsegments of the IP that have been created. And I think for us to solve the Western problem, to introduce some of these IPs that have been core IPs in Japan or Asia for a long time, we see this happening quite a bit. And we have to create new stories. We currently have a movie, a live-action movie in development at Legendary, which is Gundam, and that is something that we're targeting for the Western market. It's a different story that's going to be told for the Western market on that one.
I hear thoughtful influence adaptation nods. Thank you for that. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you all for staying till the end.